Glad to be here too.
Welcome everybody to Now. It's always
Mhm.
good to be with
Upside
whoever is with me in the now, but most especially all of you. This is a great honor and a privilege and a joy to be here together. So, yes, Connor Kees, a special guest tonight, author
Hey, hey,
of
hey.
Trusting Your Foundation, Effortless Transformation, Radical Authenticity, and Unconditional Flow. It's an
The
exciting
name
title.
sounds familiar now. It seems like you've mentioned we've talked about Connor Kees before.
Well,
All right.
he was on my podcast a few months back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Brian, my interview with you is there's a joke, this sort of a running joke where every interview that I do is one of my favorites. And sincerely, the depth and the container that you hold in the conversations that you allow um, are awesome. And my interview with you it does stand out as one of my favorites because there's a mystical curiosity that you obviously bring to the table. So I love it, man. I'm stoked to be here. I know a couple of people in the audience here, Will Francho, Robin. I love you people. This is awesome to be here. I really, I miss the Appalachian community. Um, and so it's really good to kind of, get plugged in with you folks. Yeah.
Grateful to have you here. Thanks to all of you for
Yeah.
being here. Yeah, so I was
Mhm.
curious where you are geographically in the world, so I wanted to hold that till we
Yeah.
get there.
So, I left Eastern Washington just before Thanksgiving, and I've been, I don't know, I'm guessing about 4,000 miles since then in my Subaru with my cat. Um, and so this has been a couple month long or whatever journey of car lifing it. I car lifed it for 6 months in 2022, and then spent the next year, a year between 2022 and 2020. Three, I don't, timey wimey wibbly wobbly, I'm not sure. In Hawaii on the Big Island, and
Mm.
got island fever there, you know, as they call it, and decided I really missed the mainland and wanted to travel some more. So went back to Eastern Washington and decided just before Thanksgiving that I was going to hightail it and get back on the road. So we are actually celebrating my first, I don't know, hour or so in my hometown, which is Columbus, Georgia. Um, in 2 years, I haven't been in my hometown in two
It's a
years.
homecoming.
It is, man, always, every moment. And so, uh, so yeah, it's really fun. I'm stoked.
Yeah. It feels like it's not by mistake that that's the case tonight. So
No, not at all.
that's good. Are you enjoying the traveling?
You know, this time around, it has had a different, um, sort of a different flavor. And one of the jokes that I make is that I feel like when I wake up in the morning, which is happily, you know, my bed blurred out right here is right there. When I wake up in the morning, uh, I stretch as much as I can, and then, which is not much, it's kind of cramped. And then I feel like Neil Armstrong or an astronaut, and I kind of crawl back into the front seat and then get on with the rest of my day, brush my teeth at some wherever I happen to be. You know, so it's a lifestyle. There's a flow to it. It's challenging, and I am ready for changes which have already manifested. Um, I'd love to talk about uh, the nature of how things kind of come together in favor of the vision that we hold, and also uh, the vision beyond the vision, and like our abilities to trust that. Obviously, um, yeah. So everything's great. I forget, brother. I think it was brother Jacob, or I don't know if that was you. You know, just blessed. We're just blessed. So
Amen.
yeah, that's right.
Jacob's just
Living,
glad
That's
to
right.
be here.
That's right.
Yeah.
dancing
That's
in
right.
God's grace. What a
I
blessing.
I felt called to do an exploration
Second.
into joy tonight. I was I was
Yeah.
recalling working with somebody and kind of inquiring what drew them, to me, but really to us, you know. Um,
Hmm.
and they were saying that they had felt a lot of joy, like a lot of transformation in people that they're close to that are in this circle, and a lot, joy in people, and that they were wanting that joy, wanting more of that joy, wanting to find that joy.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I felt like that would be a great collective exploration um, tonight or this morning or afternoon, wherever you are
Hmm.
listening to this, is how do we find joy? How do we find joy? How do we maintain it? What is joy? But I think
Mm.
um, that is probably a lot of people's ambition and people's motivation for the things that they're trying to accomplish is probably to try to find joy somewhere at the end of the road there, and maybe they're going about it the wrong way, or maybe they're not. But
Hmm.
yeah, what's
Do
joy? How do we find it? How do we discover it?
yeah.
Maybe we can maintain it, maybe not.
Can I get us started here?
Yeah.
Is joy something to discover?
Is joy
Is
something to discover?
is is joy a state which exists in some sequential uh, sort of linear perception of time
Okay,
that
so
right.
I will venture an answer to this question. So
Hmm.
because that determines how we define joy, right?
Hmm.
So if joy is something that is changing, that you have it like now I'm joyous, now I'm sad, now I'm angry, now I'm joyous again, now I'm frustrated, now I'm anxious. If that's the
Hmm.
joy, which I think that's the one we're talking about, then it would be something that you could potentially. Well, I think it's distinguishing because if it's something that's always the case, then would you be aware of it or not aware of it?
we so
So maybe
uh
so maybe you're saying it's something that's always the case, but there's not always the awareness of it.
and why not? So one of the biggest questions here, this gets at a whole boatload of philosophical and cosmological, even like theological and ontological threads to pull on. It gets at one of what I think of as one of the big misinterpretations, or perhaps a correct interpretation, and something that I just frankly disagree with in the way that um, certain intellectual traditions like Buddhism and Taoism are received in the West, or maybe just in general. It does say in the Tao Te Ching that flavors dull the tongue, and sights dull the eye, and things like this. So, and then, I'm an acupuncturist, so Chinese medicine, eat bland food and all this kind of stuff. What I mean is that this middle path, this kind of gray area in which plenty of spiritual traditions seem to be inviting us to participate in. Um, I think there's another way. And one of the things that Laura Rose Gage and I talk about with our ministry, which is Life in the Heart Ministries, is our ability to participate in something like joy with a capital J as a fundamental cosmological absolute. And when we place something like joy, our definitions of joy notwithstanding, because you said, like, is it a conditional thing? Well, what that I'm able to use language to describe is not a conditional thing. That is part of the nature of consciousness and its ability to throw words at things and try and grasp it and try and hold on to it. If I'm using joy with the lowercase j, there's this whole thing about, is joy like happiness? Is that what I mean? Da, 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 da. I don't really, I'm not so interested in that conversation as I am one entertaining the paradox, the possibility of there being a paradox in the way that I live my life and my innate and inherent ability to entertain both joy and not joy, and in so doing, find this kind of knife's edge, this kind of like, I don't know what that is, this like liminal space between all the contents of my experience and there being something at the center of it, which is ineffable. And I think when we use words to describe what's at the center of this, words like joy with a capital J, truth with a capital T, um, the absolute universal something that's going on here, the Tao, whatever is going on here, has these emergent properties that I want to use big words and big feelings to describe. That is, to me, the absolute truth, the joy that's available to us in this moment is kind of one of what I would call like a natural product of entering into quasi-stable orbit around that singularity, that Tao, that center point that's going on here, that's actually happening. The now, you began by invoking the present. And so it's a cosmological problem that we do run up against in non-dual philosophy, which I'd love to talk
Okay, but
about.
hold on a second. Hold on.
Go ahead.
If someone is suffering,
yeah,
how can you help them?
Say more. Say more.
No, I don't want to say more. If someone is suffering, how can you help them?
Be myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
It doesn't mean anything other than allowing what emerges in the moment to express itself in and through me as what is here.
Okay.
And so like, I'll tell you the actual question that, because this is a lot of the kind of work I do, wrestling with people's questions. And by the way, I want to say this, and I love this. And Brian, I love this vibe, man. I actually really appreciate this connection we've got, because I love that you interrupted me, because one of the things that I can't stand, my little personality self is like, can we please not sacrifice adult politeness for depth in a conversation? So if believe me, I'm just going to keep talking. So somebody interrupt me, right? And I want that back and forth to happen in a conversation, because it allows for more depth. When people wait for someone to stop talking, it's just, it's like, no, interrupt me. Like, let's go there. I want to go as deep as I possibly can in a conversation where language actually breaks down and we're just sitting here in silence. I will shut up eventually. And it's the point at which the truth with a capital T, that absolute center still point, enters the room and is doing the talking for all of us in our hearts and through our whatever's going on here.
Okay,
so how do you
I'm going to interrupt
someone?
you again.
Yeah, do it.
So are you saying that if you open up to if you're coming from your authentic self, that can invite someone else to open to their authentic self? And if they open to their authentic self, that's the authenticity is where the joy is realized.
These characteristics like joy and authenticity and just experience and perception and my identity, my self-concept, are all emergent properties of the moment in which I find myself, like this now moment.
Yep.
And by attending to that in a way that doesn't either, consciousness experiences and then it bifurcates and it wants to draw this dividing line constantly between self and other, between heaven and earth and yin and yang and everything else. Yeah. And to the extent to which I can just just like be, for lack of a better word. We know this. We talk about this.
Yeah.
We talk about this a lot in non-dual whatevers. And and one of the things I really appreciate about this community and this conversation is that sometimes I've actually been sort of not what's the word, not like lambasted, but like I've been there's been the objection to the message here on shows that I've been on where people say, Connor, you can't just trust. What are you talking about? You can't you can't just trust. And the appropriate truthful response to that is that that's not true. The extent to which I think I need a reason to behave in a certain way that feels good to me is is actually going to serve as a continual kind of barrier to sitting in the juiciness of the paradox that allows for both of those things to be the case. So I'm gonna get back and I'm gonna say that the thing that occurred to me, this is um potentially challenging. The first thing that occurred to me when you said, but how do you help people who are suffering, right?
Hmm.
I'm gonna actually put a sharp little point at the end of this, and I'm gonna say, why do you care?
Why do I care?
Why do you care?
Love. I think it's love. I think
Okay,
there's
is the
a.
love what kind of love are you talking about?
I think there's a sense of there's a transcendence of separation. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a feeling of like who
Mm-hmm.
I encounter, like if they're suffering, they're a part of me in some way. So there's like this
Aha.
natural, authentic, natural,
Yeah.
authentic movement to be of support.
Mm.
Um, yeah, if that's possible. But
That's
I think something
yeah.
that you said though is interesting,
Mm-hmm.
which is I do think there's something really powerful about being in our authenticity, and that is healing, and that may even be the deepest form of healing. And it is this kind of sense of like really deeply being in the moment, being in the now, and
Yeah.
being moved, from this
Being
moment
moved.
itself.
I
Yeah.
would say that healing and joy and authenticity and the words that we're using to describe the state which we each understand in our hearts has something to do with who and what it is we actually are, our true nature. And
Hmm.
this thing that we're pointing at is not a, again, like we said about joy initially, or like I said about joy initially, is not a condition which can be met or satisfied in my experience of space and time in order for me to, okay, now I'm joyful,
You never
right?
experienced
Because
joy?
what and I'm going to put this in like in Laura Rose Gage's words for this. She often talks about the fact, give or take, more or less the fact
Hmm.
that existence is joy with a
Yeah, I,
capital
I
J,
I like that,
right?
but
Right.
I'm just making the point that most people aren't experiencing joy. So they're not, so it seems like they're not dealing with existence. That seems to be what's happening. Did you want to say something, Will?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I I was just thinking like that I experience joy when I feel like I'm in the flow of life, like that existence
Mm-hmm.
is expressing deeply, like kind of doing God's will or exchanging love,
Mm-hmm.
or doing my own will in a high, a way that judge as loving. And then joy is kind of the byproduct of
Mm-hmm.
that. Yeah. And it feels like an exchange and an expression, of of God, really.
Right.
Because like sustained joy is like being aware that He is our source and He gives us life and He makes the meaning of love. And that's my experience. That you guys resonate with that?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would add to that um, God also makes the meaning of everything that is not judged to be love as well. It says in the Torah, God gives birth
Mhm.
to both good and evil. And interestingly, it says in the Tao Te Ching, the Tao gives birth to both good and evil.
Mhm.
And by sitting in this, not by sitting, because you can't sit there. It's not a, there's nowhere to sit. There's nowhere to sit really anywhere that is uh, a stable enough place for my conscious mind to really rest its hat on and settle into something that it will permanently feel safe about, right? Because this is passing, this is awareness, this is now, right? And so this is a big thing that we talk about in our ministry is the sacredness of desire, which is potentially problematic, especially for those strongly sort of imbued in just for lack of a better means of expression, the kind of uh, Western interpretation of what we would call non-attachment. I don't know. Again, I don't know that it's a Western thing, but we'll just call it, non-attachment. What we want to do specifically with Life in the Heart Ministry. So I'm not saying that this is, I'm not representing what y'all talk about here or Brian's message or anything like that. And by elevating, for lack of a better word, because there's nowhere to elevate it to, by making desire sacred, what we're doing is, for me, one of the biggest, again, for lack of a better word, no-nos that I sometimes hear people speak or entertain of themselves, is the separation between what God's will is and what their will is. And so one of our specific positions on this is that is a really, really easy way to continue to participate in this line in the sand drawn between you, that your conscious mind is drawing between you and the divine. And it doesn't need to be there. And so, yeah, word. So we say that, but I'm just trying to do God's will. And I would say, hey, what do you want? And this is problematic, because it could be, I was just having a conversation about this the other day. It could be a brownie at 3 a.m. because you can't sleep and you raid the fridge, the relationship between what God's will is and your will is not something that you have to figure out. And the great thing is that actually goes for everything, turns out. How to help people with their suffering, it's not something you have to figure out. This is why my answer to that question was allow consciousness, life, to express itself as what it wants. There's that desire part, as what it wants in the moment in which you find yourself. You want to clean up the oceans? Be yourself. It's kind of Disney. You want to, in the wage gap, be yourself.
I'm gonna make a bumper sticker for that. You want to clean up the oceans? Be yourself.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
I like that. Yeah. Robin, did you want to share something?
Oh, well, I would just, I just threw out there what has made me happy. One thing that has made me happy in life is that I early on realized that I loved being creative, and learning to actually creating paintings that I love doing every minute of. Mm-hmm. And then when somebody loves it and they buy it and I get money, it's also my purpose, because in my paintings, my purpose is to accentuate the joy and beauty of something, the spirit of it. And it's been one huge thing that's made me feel like that I have a purpose in doing it. It's and I get paid for it, and it bought a house, and I have heat, and I have a shower, and it's given me a lot of joy. It's not everything, but it's one of those things that does give me joy. I think when you find a purpose in life, and you can choose whatever it is. And I do agree about God. I love that quote, uh, love God and do what you will. I think a lot of people, kind of beat themselves over the head a lot thinking, well, what does God want me to do? What does God want me to do? And they don't realize that they really are God, and as part of God. And of course, I can't imagine somebody feeling good about doing things that will hurt other people, but I won't go there. I don't. Anyway, I was just adding what has made me feel joyful. And I think it's important to also have sadness too, though. I don't
Uh-huh.
see it as a bad thing, because that's how I govern my directions. I'll do something, and then when I start feeling not happy about it, it's a call to do something else, or turn left or turn right. So they're both important to me.
Yeah,
I
the
felt really
emotional.
sad last Thursday, and now I feel really good.
I remember
I got
that.
over my after Christmas grouchiness.
Yeah, the emotional guidance system leads us. I
Mhm.
think the God's will versus personal will. I think that's a really interesting topic to dive into.
One of my
I
favorites.
just
Yeah.
wanted to segue off of the what you were talking about, what you were talking about, Robin, about being an artist, because that's one of my favorite things to talk about is becoming a life artist. And I think there's such joy when we can be a channel for the creator to flow through us in the moment. And so,
Mhm.
like in the same way that you paint, and there's joy in the painting, um, and I feel joy when I'm in the creative fields as well, when I'm, poetry, painting, making music, these are things that I've played around in the past. But when I can bring that creativity into my life, so um, even something like this, if I had it kind of um, rehearsed and it had to go a certain way, or I'd get really frustrated or upset, as opposed to just being in the moment and allowing that creative energy to flow through, allowing myself to be authentic to the moment, creating relationships in that way, um, creating your work that way, creating, everything about your day. If it can just come from being a life artist and being in the creativity that flows through you in the moment,
Mhm.
I think that's so much of where the joy and fulfillment in life is sourced.
Yeah, and I just recently, this last week, I become aware of the fact that what may stop a lot of people is when they don't persist in something, just because it gets a little hard, or they have a few bad days or something. I see that of course, there are times to change. Maybe there are times where, like, okay, this isn't exactly what I want, so I'm gonna go this way or that way. But I think so many people don't get where they're going just because they quit.
What's the determining factor there as to whether or not pivoting is an authentic act of pivoting? I'm going to entertain it,
Mhm.
a little bit, because
Yeah, that's a good
what if,
question, because it's not always a matter of persisting in something either. It's something that's very internal.
right?
You have to just be honest to yourself.
Um, I'm going to offer that to the extent to which, again, we see desire as something sacred, that um, the understanding of oneself as a personality that's essentially creating itself in the moment now, and that uh, there are, for whatever reason, for whatever God-given reason, there are narratives and stories and identities that we sort of craft and we sort of build up based on the kind of perceptions of space and time that we bump up against in this life that we've somehow mysteriously has some intention behind it, whether it's God's will or us hand in hand with God or whatever's going on there. Metaphysically, cosmologically, it doesn't matter. We're here. There's narratives, and to the extent to which I run up against a story or an identity that says maybe this, like for instance, maybe this isn't right after all. Maybe, I don't know. This might not be worth it. And you feel that, right? You can kind of feel the energy of what we're doing there is we're playing into a story, an identity, a narrative, something that is creating for itself its own resistance. So you just know, just from me saying it, no, that's silly. That's not true. What is the sort of litmus test then? And again, this has to do with suffering, Brian, like the extent to which I suffer in my act of being myself in this experience that I've invited myself into of creating the life that think I'm living, like of Robin being an artist, right? Is the question. It's the sacred question. What do you want? What do you want? What is our rapport and our relationship with this thing in us which moves? Brian, you said that. Something that I think you said something that moves, right?
Yeah.
So that to me is a big deal, and that's why it's a I'm going to super tongue in cheek here, but it's a sin. It's a sin to I'm not saying that sin isn't
you're missing the mark.
I think yes, chata. It's missing the mark. It's means right. So to draw a distinguishing line between what it is in me that moves towards something which I think I desire, in and including, chocolate cake at 3 a.m.
So you don't make any distinction between egoic desire and God's desire?
I mean, no. And I think that's that's a little bit of a nuanced conversation, but the answer is no. I think because what that is you are enabling your consciousness to be the judge of what God's will is.
No, I don't see it that way at all.
Yeah.
I see it exactly the opposite. I see it that you can't be the judge. But so it actually like the ego wants to judge, right?
Right.
So let's just say for the moment, if you transcend the ego, I know that there's a lot of things in there, but if hypothetically someone transcends the ego, then they're trusting in God's will or God's desire. So I'll speak for myself.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
there's a trust for me that's what's happening is part of God's plan or divine order. And I like what you're talking about being, because then, and really only then, people may use different language for it, but then you just relax in the being.
Yeah.
And just, one phrase would be like, let go and let God, or just, you're, and there's different ways to articulate that, but it is a felt sense. And I would say then also that's when the joy comes more to the surface, because everything that's happening is like a surprise, and I think that is an element of joy. I think surprise, because I watched my son, who was out here in the beginning, the 9.5-month-old, and he has a lot of joy throughout the day because things are very surprising to him. you know, so he's just like in this state of amazement and just, you know, and that's what you're like, what I kind of was saying earlier is like, that's accessible to everybody. But we kind of lose that sense of wonder. We lose that sense of like, wow, this is amazing. You know, Jacob was talking recently about, Jacob, are you here?
Mhm.
I don't see you on here.
I am here. Yep.
Okay. Give us your little spiel about like how all these things are happening in the world and like how can we not be like amazed and in a state of
Yeah.
wonder with all these things that are happening?
Mhm.
Well, the only reason it seems normal, any of this, that we're here talking with other people that look different, observing the sky and the trees, and babies are born from a sperm and an egg that we can't even see and grow into us humans, and trees, great big trees, grow from little tiny seeds, and the earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, orbiting a giant star with other planets all in sync, all spiraling through space at millions of miles an hour. Like, that is the most absurd thing anybody could ever come up with. Like, to witness that, to view that, to feel the love, to feel the warmth of your lover's body in the middle of the night when you roll over and she's there, to have a bowel movement, to pee, all to eat food, to taste, like to feel the wind on your face and the sun on your back. I mean, it's just amazing. Like, it's, if you can let go of the fact that we were born here and this is what all we know, if you can forget all that, if you just popped in here,
Yeah.
like, wow.
So I
What?
think for me, that's the answer to the question is like to be in the, I also call it, I call it innocence consciousness sometimes, or authenticity in the authentic space. And, and then you're so deeply in the moment that there's this sense of wonder, which is reality. The life is amazing,
Right.
you know?
Right.
So you're actually like appreciating the amazingness of life. And there's like, you know, for me, like, going on my walk this morning, and I'll just like, you know, I feel grateful to be in like a place where there's a lot of nature, right? And so just looking out over the horizon and looking at the trees and the hills, and now there's snow on the ground right now, and the sun rising up over the hill, and it's just it's so amazing, and it's so there's so much joy that comes, and that the thing I'm looking at is accessible to everybody who's present in the same space, right? But they're just like a lot of them are just you know going down the road and they don't even notice, you know, the beauty of what's here. And so I think if we can just, you know, access that innocence consciousness, and there's a natural joy, and that's an interesting paradox too that I think Connor was kind of pointing at is like joy. It's so interesting because you can't get joy by trying to get it, essentially. You
Mhm.
know, it comes it
Right.
comes in this, it springs forth when you're in a relaxed, effortless state,
Yeah.
you know?
Is it already there? Is the
Yes,
joy already there?
and that's what Connor was saying is like the joy is at the heart of the joy is yes. Like we were talking a couple weeks ago about how love is at the heart, you know, love is the source of creation. So love, you could also say joy, right? Joy is at the source of creation. Um, you know, but we're so stressed out because we're 5 minutes late for this and that, you know, all this stuff, and we lose awareness of, you know, the wonder of existence, which not to say we have to be thinking about the wonder of existence 24/7, but it is the reality, whether we're thinking about it or not thinking about it.
I want to
Well,
share just one really quick thing. It's
Doesn't have to be
YouTube.
quick. You can go ahead.
Okay.
Take your time.
It's a it's a YouTube channel, and it's called Reflections of Life. And
Okay.
there's this group of people, artists, film artists that have created like 15 or 10 to 15-minute interviews with people. Usually they're older and they've had some, you know, sort of struggle in their life or not, but yeah, I mean, most people do, but they kind of come to some really cool conclusions, and there's like different topics, but they film them in their home and you see like their animals around them, and you see them making their coffee, and then they walk outside, and they're explaining what has made their life fulfilling, and it is so great to watch. I mean, I watch like one or two a day at least, and I just suggest you all try looking at it. It's called Reflections of Life, and it's on YouTube.
Sweet. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing.
I think innocence is a really important part of that, because like and that would be akin to like righteousness, living righteously and knowing that is like essentially like loving and not condemned or whatnot, you know, because the worst parts of the ego seem to have some aspect of condemnation. And I see that a lot in judgment and like the desire to be violent even. And so being able to really, you know, I'm grateful to like Jesus and the higher powers for really shining light
Definitely
on
has though.
it.
Go ahead, Will.
What's that?
There was
Or just
somebody was not muted there.
yeah, just shining light on that dynamic. And
Mhm.
also being a like a power when we move in or there's negative fields or perceptions of judgment, right? That we've lost our innocence and become unloving, then we turn back to, you know, the power of grace, receive love again, and then that propels us back to be able to live and feel that innocence and joy. I think that's an important part of the spiritual journey, at least it has been for me, like in terms of forgiveness and really that tool, because yeah, the shadow of the ego is to maintain some reason why, you know, our guilt is justified. And so we need to live in an expression of dedication to a joyful living and innocence, by being pure and innocent, which I think is a big part of a lot of spiritual traditions. They speak of a moral code that leads towards purity, you know. And yeah, adhering
That's
to that.
interesting. I never thought of it quite that way.
Yeah, it's to maintain and allow for our state of innocence, which meets God's condition that He can reach us because we're available to the flow, not impeded by negativity and various, you know, vicissitudes of the world and our karma. Yeah, so it's a very important conversation in terms of maintaining joy, having that, you know, relationship to that which clears it out, you know, when that perception has soured, as it seems to do for a lot on the journey at various times. So,
And he says it springs from the living waters.
Will, I find that uh, really problematic, because God having conditions or criteria that need to be met in order for and what we would call in our, you know, experience of self as an experience of God in consciousness or whatever. I am um
I feel
uh
you.
I don't I in other words I disagree completely.
Can I
That
respond?
yeah, grace has no condition. Yeah.
I'm with you on that in terms of, I think, the higher levels of it, and obviously the part that creates us in the moment, because whether I'm judging this or not, God is still creating me, correct?
Yeah.
But in order to access like the higher parts of his will, I believe there is some structure of condition, like
But
prostrating before him
mhm.
completely, perhaps, you know, or some, you know,
Yeah,
movement toward him. But that, you
right.
know, how do y'all feel about that? There is an unconditional aspect, but in terms of the, you know, higher aspects, it seems to be quite a decision in my consciousness and the attitude to be receptive of it. Or for me, that's been a deep choice to not be adherent to another state of consciousness and to be empty before him, which I think is a pretty common spiritual ideal, you know?
We may all have different ideas of what God, the word God means.
God is the loving source of all creation. That's our definition here in
Okay.
the circle.
Right.
If I want
I would
to
say
add,
maybe to know to know him, one has to be loving to really meet his condition or something, loving awareness. Yeah. So, you know, be in a state of receptivity, not restless, you know, would receive some quality, or I receive a different quality. I'll say, just speak for myself.
Mhm.
But I hear you on the problem in non-dual thinking. That's kind of a linear, like growing towards God by becoming more receptive, you know,
The the
and
the
present
very
with them.
the very use of a term like higher implies gradations of something which cannot be um, separated from itself.
Antonio, did you want to share?
just want to add, listening to Will and the difference between what they're discussing. I think perhaps what Will may be referring to, which I agree with, is to access the divine frequencies, divine states of it is a frequency, it is a vibratory energy, if you will. And what he was, I think what Will was talking about, that innocence and that purity. I totally agree also with Connor that there is, from God to all God's creation, there is no judgment and no separation. But from, let's say from the top down, but from the bottom up, for us to access those levels of divine frequencies, divine energy, we do have to be in that state of purity, in that state of innocence, as in, if you are uh, if you are a murderous, if you're doing evil stuff, if you're, a bad person harming and, maybe, I don't know, you going to the extreme, devil worshiping and stuff, you may not have a divine experience because your frequency may not be that high. I think that's perhaps what will, I mean, that's kind of what I was feeling about what he was getting. Not so much that there's a distinction from God towards any of his children, but more of for us to be able to access those. And I do agree, those higher states of consciousness. There is, I think, humanity, a large swath of humanity is an unconscious state, and it's not a hierarchical holier than thou. Oh, look at us, we're so spiritual, we're so divine. No, it's the fact that when you hold that divine love in your heart towards all people and you don't wish others ill and you don't cause harm, your personal state of energy is at that divine frequency where you can access that higher aspect of your own self. Even not, let's not talk about other third parties, your own divine higher self. And if you are in an unconscious state, if you're constantly getting drunk, if you're committing rape, if you're causing harm, you perhaps don't have access energetically to your higher self. So that's all. That's what I was feeling Will was referring to, as far as that, that purity and that higher state of consciousness. Not that there's a distinction from, in the other direction. And so I was just wanted to add that between what Connor was disagreeing with about what Will said.
Mm.
I think what so it's like, obviously an important question is always, what is truth? What is the truth, right? So my realization, which is what I hear threaded through what's been shared by all of you, is that their separation is an illusion, that division is an illusion, and division creates the gradations and all these different things, right? So if we're living in the truth, it's interesting when you actually read the Gospels, Jesus talks about the truth constantly. It's like the truth, the truth, the truth, the truth. In fact, at the very end, Pontius Pilate says something like, "What is the truth?" something like that. He says, like, I asked him, what do you mean the truth? But he's always talking about the truth, right? And so anyway, um, the truth that there is no division, that there really is no separation, then
I and
you
the Father are one.
then what is being talked about, like the way to live or how to what's pure, how to live pure, how not to live pure, you will naturally express that from this space of living beyond the illusion of separation and division. So basically, oneness, which is love. Love is the sense of like, um, the idea of love your neighbor as yourself is like the reason that that's a good thing to do is because your neighbor literally is yourself. Like your neighbor is a literal reflection of the same essence as you. Your neighbor is a reflection of the divine in the same way that you are, in the same way that everyone is. And so when we come from this place of realization, then we can naturally move through the world from this pure, quote unquote, expression in the world that is, let's say, it's deeper than laws or commandments, right? So many laws or commandments,
Mm.
they're probably trying to guide you in that direction, or they're probably trying to tell you, but this is even deeper than that. This is coming from the authentic essence of realizing, who you really are.
So for me, in my experience, I didn't have I didn't have a choice. I didn't have an option in receiving God's grace, at least that I was aware of. It's not something I was working for or looking for. I feel like I was living in such a place of suffering, um, that there was no other. I don't know. I look at where I was suffering and struggling in addiction and depression and lack, and everywhere in my life, just struggling and suffering. And where I'm at now, it's like, man, how do I say this? I didn't have an option. It's like my life, my decisions that led me to the life that I was living. There was only one. There was only one way to go from there, and it's like not an active choice that I made consciously. It's just like by God's grace, I'm here, whole and healthy and happy and like free. And it's not something that I was searching for or listening or reading the books and searching for the guidance. And it's just like by good fortune. Um, I just received God's grace.
Jacob, can I ask you a question? Because
Yes, please.
I think that it might. Um, okay, so how much effort and striving and action and willpower and pushing and shoving do you exert on a daily basis to stay in touch with what you've been shown by the grace of God?
Not much. I mean, it's not hard to do. It's not hard to be here.
Amen. 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 So I'm gonna pipe up again here, and I'm gonna say that I personally have had an extremely my fine, my ego, my personality has had an incredibly hard time these past couple minutes here. Um, because when I am brought into the field of I can feel it, like the deeply held spiritual conviction of um of separation as an actual fact in the whole cosmology here. I point to Platonism. I point to all these these sort of intellectual traditions that have really just reinforced the conscious mind's tendency to bifurcate the world into this and that and the other. And God does not do that. And God does not, there's nowhere which God does not live. There's nothing which is not God. And somehow, mysteriously and paradoxically, this is sort of like a trope that I often put forward in conversations like these. Isn't it whack? Isn't it so odd that the one thing that could mysteriously inhibit the actual manifestation and experience of the will of God, isn't it weird that the one thing that could actually keep God's will from being done on earth is me, my self-concept, my consciousness, the stories that I tell myself, the cosmology that I believe and that I live under, and my relationship to life, love, God, the universe, and everything in it, that my understanding of my will and how how tightly I grip onto this thing that's passing in front of my eyes as something that needs to be figured out, rather than something that is inviting me to trust in it. And that is, my friends, what the moment that we are in is not only communicating to us in a language that can't be languaged, but is the actual substance of what we see in front of us, right? So the Gospel of Thomas, Logion 5, is basically points to, it says, recognize what's in front of your face, and that which has been hidden from you will be revealed. In other words, the kingdom of heaven is an actual, literal, whatever, act of seeing. It's a shift in perception and nothing else. The New Testament, Paul said, take it or leave it. Brother Paul said, to him that esteemeth it to be unclean, it is unclean. So to what extent am I participating in this platonic duality between self and other, and this the kind of way that we in spiritual parlance now have mapped on the metaphor of frequencies and higher and lower. This is very platonic language on the one hand, and it's also very it admits of a continuum, and that's beautiful. We've got frequencies. How many frequencies? Infinite. Great. One infinity. Infinity is one thing, and everything is included in it. So at least in my message in Life and Heart Ministries, we I can't remember the last time I used higher or lower as a metaphor for where we should be placing our attention and what we might be allowing through ourselves in the moment, because I want my language I want to interact with this thing, whatever's going on here, and allow it to inform my experience of it, allow it to inform itself of a way of being perceived that is easy.
Can I add something I think is interesting? I like what you're sharing. I think the next inquiry is one of the things I find myself saying a lot is, if non-duality does not include duality, it's not actually non-duality.
It damn sure includes paradox.
So, yes to everything you're saying, but if you say, but it doesn't include higher or lower, now we're in a duality, right? So it has to include higher and lower also.
that's great, but higher and lower are not projections that I'm going to admit my conscious mind of uh, projecting onto the nature of God. God is the connection that I am invited to feel with this moment.
The group has gotten very quiet.
I think we did it. Yeah.
We did it. We accomplished the goal. We silenced the mind. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share, particularly anybody who hasn't shared yet? You can, if you shared as already, that's fine, but just want to welcome people who haven't shared as well.
This is a crazy intense group, man. This is like been wild. But my personal experience being here as a guest has been moving and really, really intense. I would love to hear from more people as well.
Yeah.
I'll just say one quick thing.
You
Uh, a lot of times when I hear you guys talking, it feels like a lot of intellectualizing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
I like things kind of, for me anyway, made more simple, like with an example. Like,
Yeah.
okay, maybe you could show an example of this person is struggling because, and maybe the way they're thinking, and a happier, more godlike way to think would be like this, and something like that. I don't
Yeah,
Happy, yeah.
I agree. And I think that, and I think Connor would agree with this too. Just talking about this stuff at all is kind of a weird thing.
It's
You
kind
know,
of like
it's
a sin. This came to me today. Trying to understand this, trying to think that we can understand this is a sin in
well, we're not,
itself.
yeah, so I don't think we're trying to, I mean, I'm not trying to understand it with my mind,
Right. Yeah.
but there
We're
is a
trying to live
power.
it.
What I'm interested in is being in the presence together, right?
Hmm.
In the living
Exactly.
waters together. And
Exactly.
so again, this is what's so interesting is like the non-duality and the duality. So the non-duality being like the oneness is present, and then we're talking. And the entire talking is duality. The entire talk about this, talk about that, talk about this, talk about that. So the thing that's
Exactly.
interesting to me, this is kind of like the whole question of this to me is the underlying question. And this actually to me is this is a whole kind of longer thing, but this is actually what Christ represents to me is how do you be in the duality, what or how do you perceive the duality while being in the truth, being in the oneness? That's the whole question of this human experience to me.
Mm. Mm.
Right, so it's like we're talking and then the mind, hears things and maybe it gets upset or it gets triggered or I agree, I don't agree, i don't
Yeah.
i don't like that person, I like that, all this stuff is happening, right? And like, but
You,
the essence, the truth underneath it, this unified field, this God consciousness is there the whole
do
time.
you,
But
do
so
you,
how do we participate in the world? Because like there is this kind of spiritual thought of like, don't participate in the world. Just that's not really, to me,
right.
that's not really what it's about. It's about
Yeah.
bringing the things that apparently seem separate, creating the bridge between the two. So that's the interesting exploration, that and it's kind of a living exploration.
Mhm.
Maybe you do it by just calling it all good.
Calling it all good.
I love that, Robin. Yes. I love that.
You could also call it all bad. That would make everything the same as well.
Okay, I've got a question.
Yes, Mark.
I don't understand this whole non-duality thing. I have to confess, I don't get it. I don't get the commitment to it, where it comes from. We use words like pure. In order for something to be pure, there's got to be impurities. In order for something to be true, there's got to be things that are not true.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get this whole non-duality thing. I don't understand the commitment to it. Where can you point to or explain to me, how do you know whatever this non-duality thing is? How do you know? Where is the revealed pillar of non-duality that everybody seems to be committed to? I don't understand it.
Are you asking me, Mark?
I'm asking anybody who can maybe explain to me what non-duality is, because we all use terms
Right.
that don't make any sense unless there's a duality. And Brian, I think you were kind of saying that a little bit ago. It doesn't make sense to talk about purity if there isn't impurity. It doesn't make
Right.
sense to talk about something being right if there isn't something that's wrong.
Right. And if you, right. So, philosophically speaking, if you cornered me, I would say there's nothing which is impure. There's nothing which is untrue. It was Will invoked purity, right? And I would say that purity is just as much a characteristic of the moment in which I find myself, like this now moment, as joy and truth and all of those other things that we can feel orbiting around the center of this. So where's the pillar? It's not anywhere. Where's the correct way of thinking? There isn't one, right? One of the fundamental things that I think, this is an awesome and very, very challenging question, Mark, because I've been leaning more towards basically outing myself as a non-dualist, because I talk on a lot of conversations, and I have conversations about non-dualism without using the words non-duality or non-dualism. And what I love is that when you invoke it, it invokes the paradox of uh, duality itself. Because if there's non-duality, then there must be duality, and you get it. What's called in logic, you get an infinite regress of problems, right? Um, for for me at least, there's an orientation to the world that paradoxically, that okay, the truest thing is actually, for me, going to be something that sits in the balance between these opposite poles, right? If I can entertain something as being conditionally true and conditionally untrue, or unconditionally true and unconditionally untrue, all kind of simultaneously, then what emerges from that, and Robin talks about like the possibility of something being practical, well, or having a practical example. I pulled out the Tao Te Ching because I was going to read poem 67. I may or may not bore you with that, but I love this critique and this question because, to my mind at least, opening one's mind, and in a sense orienting oneself to the world in a way that allows one's mind and one's consciousness and one's concept of themselves and everything, language for sure, and everything that comes with that, and all experience, to kind of be a subjective and intersubjective happenstance, circumstance, which isn't ever going to adequately reflect the full nature of what's going on here. Like, can you describe God with words? Yes. And is that ever going to really satisfy the thing which your heart knows is true about life and about God? No. Because what's actually going on here is in some sense transcendent of my ability to language it and my perceptions and all of that. So does that help a little bit? That felt a little that was tough, Mark. Does that helpful? Is that helpful? And will you ask me more if it's not?
No.
Let
It,
me
what you just said made no sense to me whatsoever.
I love
And
it.
I
Very good.
don't mean to be. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but
That's great.
I don't get
Great.
it. I don't understand it.
Brian, I have some
I
thoughts.
want to know how
Yeah.
you know all that. How do you
I
know?
don't. I don't.
Oh,
And I actually, so I
then
don't claim that. Well, but Mark, do you, brother? Do you know what you know? Or is the possibility of there being the felt presence of something which is not present here? It's not an intellectual understanding of something. There's an embodied something that wants to emerge through this experience of self that I call Connor Keys. What the hell is going on here? Who is it that's looking through my eyes? There's something mysterious happening here that when I tilt my sails in this at this particular angle, my orientation of the world actually, I discover, is fertile ground for a relationship with self and with the world that allows this thing to live and to be lived.
Okay,
And that's
Will.
God. Yeah.
Will, you want to say something?
Yeah.
Connor, I really appreciate what you're saying. Like, you remind me of some of my favorite Zen teachers that talk about like the moment that you objectify life, you've made a separation in the mind and created duality and concepts out of what is like in pure experience and pure innocence. Everything is kind of profoundly one. And Mark, that's what I get from non-duality, that in the largest context of life is God, the creator, the source of it, like a single source, that the devil didn't make himself, whatever seems to be an opposite spawned off of, creation somewhere. And so non-duality recognizes that. And yet our world, the consciousness I grew up in as a will, was in a duality totally, the way I thought, what I perceived, what my values were. And so I recognize, I think Connor and Brian are speaking to a really high teaching in terms of accepting, just embracing, being with life and all of yourself in a way that doesn't shut off the valves, because then you get to know yourself. And Robin, you mentioned self-honesty. I mean, that's the greatest, to me, directive on the path, is really being honest with ourselves, how we feel with that relationship, with that thing, which is God. So non-duality holds the largest container, but most paths, and what I was speaking to, speaks of growth within two concepts, good and evil, where we're moving away from evil towards good. And then as one embraces good, we tend to graduate into that, the fullness of that viewpoint, that it's all God and it's all good, because
Amen.
that is now what we're aware of. But my
Amen.
journey is a graduated hierarchy through what seems like duality into a more appreciation of the fact that God is all consuming and can't be objectified, and I shouldn't judge my desires because my poor ones point me towards my better ones, and by getting to know myself, it's actually made me enjoy my authentic experience, grow more deeply into what is unfolding as life purely. But it's very challenging to talk about. I really appreciate, though, bringing in that higher aspect, because honestly, it's really rare in this world to meet life rawless, just fearlessly, with not trying to control it or define it, just letting it all be there. I think that's really how you get to know oneself and then learn of what God is truly. So I hope that helps.
Let me take a crack at this.
Go.
Right. Mark, let me know if this helps, okay?
Y'all know me.
So you said you can't have purity without impurity, you can't have, so all that is obviously true, right? So you have day, you have to have night. You have hot, you have to have cold, right? So that's duality. So I would say, and I actually think the Tao, which Connor was talking about, actually totally supports this, is like the actual world we experience is actually created by duality. Duality is the creation of the whole. Like duality is really all we ever see, all we're experiencing is duality all the time. So we don't actually it's anyway, I won't go to that part yet. But we're experiencing duality. The play of duality is what we're experiencing all the time. So everything you said is completely right. Um, so then you sort of recognize that you go, well, wait a minute. If there's day, there's going to be night. If there's hot, there's going to be cold. If there's pain, there's going to be pleasure. If there's pleasure, there's going to be pain. So you start to realize that these things alternate. You know, you have one, then you're going to have the other. So the creation of one innately creates the other. So they go back and forth. They come and they go. They appear and they disappear. So there's there's like a loving presence that is that is with what is happening with this play of duality. So I recognize that there's day, so then I see there's going to be night. So there's like kind of like a loving presence that's, and it's hard to put in words, but kind of like, let's say underneath, you know, there's like a where it says underneath that notices these things and sees these things, and so you kind of recognize this part of yourself, that there's this presence. Presence is probably the best word. There's a presence that is with the duality. So then when you start to observe the duality, you start to realize like, well, why would I resist what's happening now? Because that doesn't make any sense, because this is what's happening. So for me, I learned more and more not to resist, and it's, you know, it takes a lot of presence and awareness. But instead of resisting what's happening now, to be a participant in it, to co-create, to engage it, to there's a word I'm missing that I want to have, respond, you know, to consciously respond. So it
Participate.
doesn't, yeah. So it doesn't mean that I may see something happening and my response may be it's upsetting. It may upset me. You know, maybe if I see somebody hurting somebody else, it doesn't mean that I like everything that I see happening, is my point, right? Which I think it gets, when we talk about these subjects, people can get concerned about that, you know, that it doesn't mean, really, it just means that there's a loving
Right.
presence. So then you're going to respond, because it's a loving presence, you're going to respond from that loving presence to what you see happening. And I guess the last thing to say is, there's kind of like the only place that you would notice this quote unquote non-duality is if the mind was completely quiet. So if the mind's completely quiet, then there's nothing else, there's nothing happening else. So then there's a sense of no duality for the moment, for that particular moment in time.
Which
But then
reminds me of that quote, Shakespeare, is it? There's nothing good nor bad, but thinking makes it so.
there's nothing good nor bad, but thinking makes it so.
And so when your mind is quiet, you're not thinking. And so it's not good or bad.
When your mind is quiet, it's basically like the universe disappears, which is actually a book that Will's talking about, The Disappearance of the Universe.
All right, let me ask it this way.
Go
Maybe
ahead.
you can help me. Connor, I come from a traditional Christian viewpoint.
Cool. I love it.
And we pray the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Okay, that implies that there are things that are out of alignment, that are not kingdom living. So we're praying that things would align. Now, I can see, I believe that God is sovereign over everything, anything that we would call good or bad. The fires in Los Angeles, the horrible Western North Carolina situation from a couple months ago. That's all in his purview. We might call it bad. Oh, we might call it painful. We might call it, troubling, upsetting, awful.
Right.
But in God's purview, it's all, I can see this whole unified thing in God's mind.
Right. Right.
Now, when people say I'm God, no, I'm not. God created me. I
I think
believe
Mark,
he's
Mark, I
in
think
me.
if you can see that in God's mind, I think I would just stay
That's
right
it.
there. Yeah, I think
I agree.
that's what we're
Well,
pointing at.
I
it's
agree, Brian.
the total sovereignty of God. There's
Hmm.
not one molecule in this universe
Hmm.
that's rogue that he isn't sovereign over. So if
Sure.
that's the non-duality that I can understand, that everything is within his purview,
Right.
but
Yes.
I am striving to align with that.
Right.
So I
Right.
see that as a duality to where, I mean, we're going to live for eternity, right? And Brian, you talked an hour ago about joy being in the surprise. And
Hmm.
if we're going to live for eternity and we're going to experience joy, we're going to be constantly surprised forever as we
Hmm.
learn more about this infinite God. And
Hmm.
so, you know, I can, I guess I can make peace with the whole non-duality thinking if I just associate it with the mind of God. Uh, yeah, just what I
Paul
said.
Paul asks us to have uh, the mind of Christ.
Correct. I agree. Yeah, but I don't have that 100% right now. It's a
You
process. We talked last week about
right, and
sanctification.
you're made in the image, Mark.
Absolutely, I am.
Right. So what we're after, so to speak, is actually the will of God through our little vantage point, our little lenses, coming to understand itself for what it is, which is creation.
Mhm.
And and uh I agree, I agree with Brian that, this all seeing this as the mind of God is no different than anything that I would assert is actually true of the world. When you say alignment, like your objective is to align with that. Of course it is. It's also God's will in you to to for you to realize that as the way that your life is best lived. And in doing so, it's not that God is necessarily, this is my personal philosophy, this is where it might diverge some, I don't know. It's theological though, and that is to say that it's not that God is somewhere separate than this moment, with holding in front of you the obligation to behave or perform in a certain way. The prayer is, "Thy will be done." It's actually both of those things are a command. Give us our daily bread. First of all. Second, thy will be done. Thy will be done. No pretty please, no cherry on top. Uh, what we're doing is we're orienting ourselves to the world in a way that allows for the possibility of more of the mind of God to be participatory with this consciousness that I see myself as being, Mark and Connor, right? It's that's circumstantial. I'm just made in the image, right? So I hope that's helpful.
A
Yeah.
couple quick things for me. We need to start to wind it down, so just a few more
Yeah.
minutes left.
Great.
Humility. Annie brought up that in the thread here in the chat here earlier. I think that's a big word we haven't maybe really mentioned yet, but I think it's like, to me, it's this humility, like the mind of God. Everything's in God's purview. So there's a humility in me, and that actually allows me to relax, and that allows me to, Connor's using the word trust. That allows me
Right.
to trust, and then, there is a joy there. There's a joy because I don't have the stress, I don't have the anxiety, I don't have the I'm allowing God's plan, to the mind of God, to create, moment by moment. One thing that's interesting, I actually was reflecting, I think it was with Jeff, I was reflecting this with the other day. It's so funny because the Our Father, like, I said that prayer. I went to Catholic school, so I said that prayer
Oh.
so many times, you know. And then someone pointed out a couple weeks ago, Our Father, not my Father, Our Father. So it's like, whoa, it's right there. He's saying it's God is we're all the sons and daughters of God, not just me. He's inviting us all to be the sons and daughters of God and to realize that. So it's just funny how these things, like these deeper meanings of this stuff is coming to me more and more, and the power of these deeper meanings of the recognition. I mean, that would be a non-dual realization. So that's the idea is like there's the equal divinity within all of us. Now, that doesn't mean that we're all realize that or we're all living from that place, but there's that sense that we're all equally God's children.
Yeah, we're all image bearers.
Yeah.
I like that, Mark.
Amen.
I like that, Mark.
Amen. All right. Closing thoughts. Anybody want to share a couple quick closing thoughts?
I love you all, and this has been absolutely spectacular.
Been a good one.
We love
Thanks,
you too.
man.
And I love all of you as well. I think love is the way to close it out.
Yeah.
Love.
Love,
Thanks
love.
everybody for their inquiries and their different ways of spinning things and looking at things from different
Absolutely.
angles.
And I want to say, Mark, I really value and totally dig and totally appreciate your like, dude, what is going on here? Like,
Yeah.
I absolutely
Well,
love that, man. That's incredibly valuable. Yeah.
You can see if you look through the names that my son is Jeffrey, and he's on
Yes.
here. We talk about this stuff all the time, and he introduced the whole concept of non-duality to me months ago, and I've been trying to get my head around it. And
it's not possible to get your head around it.
That is true.
and I'm going to stop
That
trying.
is true.
Yeah. But
his ways are past finding out.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Well, we're going to spend eternity learning about it.
Yeah.
Amen.
As part of the mind
bud.
of God.
Amen.
All right.
Dancing in the imagination.
Thank you
for
all.
being here. See you in the next now.
Much love.